welcome back. And as we earlier said in our intro, the Arab Week for Sustainable Development that was held early last week and continued for several days and hosted expertise from several Arab worlds and hosted intellectuals and hosted other people who are really concerned with the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development 2030, 2063. Of course, we all know that 1,300 senior officials, decision makers, and other people that were concerned with this particular issues, the most vital issues when it comes to sustainable developments were discussed. And the three outcome themes for the week were the integration, of course, and towards a better life, new horizons for ever-changing world, and other issues that were taken seriously by the attendees. And to shed more light over the topic, we're joined live here in the studio with Dr. Nourhan Moussa. She's an international law teacher. Good morning, Dr. Moussa.
Good morning.
Good morning, doctor. And first of all, I'd like to shed the light more on this event, especially these three important themes that were adopted in this event.
Yeah, of course. It's one of the important things that held in Egypt, especially in Cairo. It's the third edition for the Arab Week Sustainable Development. And I think like it's kind of focused more about the strategies that has been adopted by the policymakers in different countries in the Arab world. Let me start with what happened like the last years, like when the United Nations has adopted the UN SDGs on September 2015, and then it comes to force on 2016. And the League of the Arab States were really concerned with that and try to support all the policymakers and the governmental policymakers to adopt the vision and the indicators of the UN SDGs among their national strategies. And this is what had happened with Egypt. Regarding our vision of 2030, which has the three main perspectives of economic, social, and environmental aspects. So I think it's very important. It is not about only expertise or experts with the stakeholders, but also it was very good in engaging other stakeholders who are concerned with the UN SDGs as well as youth.
Right. With Egypt assuming the taking the chairmanship of the African Union and setting its own vision for the 17 goals of the SDG and also the 2030 vision, uniting all the African countries in the continent under only one umbrella, how is that going to be able to empower the 17 goals of the SDGs?
Of course, it's, I mean, if we are talking about the African Union, if we are talking about the League of the Arab States as concerned to be an international entities that are concerned with the sustainable developments. It is not the responsibilities only of those partners, but also it's the responsibilities of countries, of other stakeholders representing in the civil society, governmentals, ministers, international councils, and national councils as well. So I think this kind of harmonizing between the national strategies and the strategy of the African Union that called the 2063 strategy with the Sustainable Development 2030, I think this kind of alignment between all the aspects and the indicators to be achieved. So I think like even Egypt is playing a very important role as being part of the Arab world as well as we are part of the African world. So I think we are having this kind of interfacing and the transforming of the different aspects or the different nature between the African countries and the Arab countries. As well, I would like to highlight the most important thing, which is related to the differences in the current changing and the crucial changing in the MENA region or in the Arab world as well as the transformation that the Arab countries, the African countries are seeking for regarding development and settlement of conflict issues. I think Egypt is playing a very active role here and there with trying of harmonizing, getting all the people on one table to achieve partnerships, because this is actually what we are caring about. And this is one of the main topics that has been titled in the Arab Week, as well as this is actually what we are seeking to do with the African countries as well.
Right. If I'm talking about youth in particular and the empowerment of youth, and if we're talking about people in general, let me say that when it comes to the youth, it's not going to be that easy. I mean, how can we bring them all on one table? As we have seen actually in one of the, or in many of the youth conferences that took place recently in Egypt. I'm talking about the idea, yes, for the African and Arab countries as well, because each country is facing a challenge, and we will never reach sustainable development without sitting all of us on the table. Each one must understand what's going on and to be part, an integral part of this agenda and of the main goals that we are looking for.
Of course. Let me say that I try to divide this into two parts. The first part, that, as you mentioned, that there are a lot of conferences, forums that take place nowadays, not only in Egypt, but also on the level of the Arab countries and the African countries. I think like Egypt take the lead of having such a platforms and interactive platforms to gather youth with the policymakers, with the decision makers, as well as trying to fulfill the gap or decrease the gap between youth and their ambitions and their our insights to the world, to the sustainable development,
But by
and so
the way,
on.
also talking about the youth who are not attending. I mean, the youth who are attending, definitely things changed and their vision changed. But what about those who are not attending and still they are criticizing, or they are not aware, or they do not understand the real challenges we are facing?
You're true, but I think like those platforms are open to all. So it's kind of our responsibilities, and the responsibility is not on the government, it is not on policy makers or decision makers only, but it also the responsibility of individuals, responsibilities of media as well, to work on raising the awareness of those forums, those initiatives that took place every now and then, to gather more people to see on the ground. So as you mentioned, like we have like the World Youth Forum, and it become kind of a brand now. We're gathering a lot of people from across the world. Now we have the Arab Week, as we mentioned, it's the third edition. I think there is kind of invitations that took place under the auspices of some embassies, ministries, and so on. And I think this is also give the insights. People who are going for the first time and see what's going on, try to interact, see policymakers and the decision makers in front of you, so they have the real interaction and dialogue. And this is very important to see or to tackle the international and the national as well topics, and to have a better understanding, to be able to criticize on the right way. It is not a problem to criticize as much as you have the knowledge. So you can go through a real dialogue enhancing a specific topic, one of the development goals, as well as each development goal has a specific indicators where a lot of stakeholders are responsible for achieving this. So as you mentioned, the first part, that we have those kind of platforms nowadays. What had happened on the sense that we are talking about the Development Week or the Arab Development Week, we found that there were a lot of sessions that focused on youth and youth empowerment, as well as to empower youth, they must have the knowledge. And the second thing, they should be very near to the responsibles and the stakeholders to understand better, to even suggest ideas, suggest initiatives to be implemented on the ground. And through the sessions, there were a lot of things that tackle initiatives for youth, talking about education for youth, how we can gather them much more to achieve the indicators of the SDGs, and as well as the national strategies for each country.
Right. One of the main topics that had great concern in that particular week was and we were talking even before air about the impacts of climate change and how it has direct impact over economic development, over sustainable development at large, over the relapse over the whole process that on Earth, the life on Earth. It seems that the world is not in full realization of the dangers behind climate changes when it comes to deforestation, when it comes to the breach or the violation of the economic system and the biological balance, and using toxic materials and burning coal and all these violations that seems, or the pollution in rivers, for example, or something, or the endangered species and the wildlife. They are not in quite full realization of the dangers behind that. It's not because of the environment, but it's also going to have its own impact over our lives.
True.
So how do you see that?
I think, as you mentioned, that we need to raise the awareness of that. And it's not about the climate change only, but also for the 17 goals. So one of the things that the Arab Week focus on, and other initiatives that they are focused on the raising the awareness of the Arab citizens on that. And I think, as you mentioned, that the climate change is one of the severe issues that may affect a lot of aspects that we are going or developing. Nowadays, what had happened in the Arab world drive us to realize there is kind of new international system that will appear so far. We have a lot of challenges on the ground, on economic aspects, on environmental aspects, as well as social aspects. So I think we need to adopt a real policies with taking on all the consideration of the other two aspects of economic and social. And this is actually will drive the stakeholders as well as the policymakers and decisions to go on the right path. And this is actually what we are working on regarding the Vision 2030, the national strategy of Egypt, where we have three main aspects. One of them is the environmental aspects. What we should, or every country should focus on, read well what's going on around the world, because nowadays we are part of the whole world. Second is adopt a real policies matching with the indicators of the SDGs, as well as the nature of the Arab countries and the nature of the African countries. I think we need kind of an ecosystem focused on how we can implement or adopt a real, not strategy here, but a real call to action towards facing this kind of a challenge.
Enforcing the law.
Enforcing. And of course, according to the national part, I mean, we have two parts on that sense. We have the international agreements that focus on specific topics that considered to be a threat to the whole world, like the climate change, and also the kind of the nature of each country, where you should take in consideration, so you should adopt a specific strategy. And the national strategy should be aligned with the international agreements. So as we heard so far that United States, for example, stepped backward regarding the agreement of the climate change. I think we are very eager to be part of, read the international standards, as well as taking this as an adoption in our policies or the vision of 2030. We take in consideration in each aspect we are working on as Egypt, to take in that the environmental dimension of each policy. Also create and review the laws. It's very important because it should be follow the development and the rapid growth on technological aspects and environmental aspects. And law enforcement, as you mentioned, because sometimes we don't have the problem in issuing the law itself as much as
implementing
and
maybe
enforcement
upgrading
of the law.
it according to the situation, actually.
Of course, it should be aligned with the international agreements, aligned with the international movement.
Let me move on to something when it comes to the social life, economic life, or sustainable development in these two in particular. What I liked recently actually is including the education system in this. And nowadays we have seen even the children in high school, they started to study economy, and they started to study things that has to do with climate change, and to people an integral part of their projects to be applied in challenges taking place in their countries. And we have seen models as well for whether we're talking about UN, Arab League, and all these things. How far are these things are really important and can help in promoting awareness, especially that when you talk about high school, you're talking about the real leaders, because sometimes I consider university students, yes, of course, they are part of the future, but the generation who are still in school, you are still shaping their minds.
Of course, I do agree to a good extent. We should make this kind of harmonizing between the university students and the high school. And I think they are eager, and I think one of the visions that should be adopted and be implemented, how to introduce kind of modules to them and simulation, as you mentioned. The last 5, 6 years, I find, maybe 10 years, I find kind of development in adopting and implementing modules and simulation in our universities regarding United Nations Security Council, General Assembly, and also even in our World Youth Forum and the national forums as well, has been taken in consideration this kind of simulation. I hope that we find kind of examples in the high schools taking this in consideration, because as you mentioned, it's kind of shaping the minds as well when you put them in the role of responsibilities. Because if you are seeking about a development for communities and societies, it should start with the mindset and should start with individuals. So I think having policies for development and working on individual will lead, of course, to the development of communities. So we need to give them the chance and put them on the role of responsibilities to represent, and this is will drive them by chance, not actually by chance, but this is will drive them by essential to read more about the topic they are talking about, understand how those international organizations and entities working and how they aligned with the international and the ministers and the national councils.
Gender inequality and social integration are also from the very important goals when it comes to the 2030, 2063 vision. And when we talk about gender inequality, we've seen that Egypt have come a long way, especially when assigning about 6 ministers in the cabinet and in the parliament of representatives and many other decision-making positions. But also with when we talk about the African countries in the continent, Egypt still have a long way to come to be able to implement gender inequality and address it the proper way and set a good role.
I do agree, and the word that to address on the right and the appropriate way is much more important, because it is not about saying like women empowerment as a vague word, as much as it focused on how you can introduce that, how to introduce this point to your community, as well as on international level. Yes, we achieved a lot, and according to the last modifications on our constitution, that we are very eager to have at least 25% of women representing in the parliament, and I'm quite sure that we will see much more. Yes, we are eager to have much more ministers on the government, but also what we care about, it is not women as much as let's say a very well candidates and equipped women with all the knowledge, all the policies and so on, to make her even can serve on the right way. And this is actually what we are caring about. And I see that Egypt, aligned with the Arab countries and the African countries, are working on such policies, how to raise the awareness, the real awareness of empower women on the right way, to find her in all roles
Right.
All
in
fronts.
yes, of course. And this is actually, by the way, was one of the themes, as you mentioned, which is towards better life. One of the things focused on that is women empowerment and youth empowerment, but as you mentioned, on the right way and appropriate to be introduced.
Yeah, sure. On that note, Dr. Nourhan Moussa, international law teacher, we're going to end it here. Thank you very much for coming. You have a very good day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
And we're going to go to a short break and we'll come back to you, so stay with us.